Hello and welcome to the latest Science for Sport podcast. I'm your host Matt Solomon, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Cook. So Matt is the owner of Transferable Training, a company which looks at speed and reconditioning for individual athletes. So who better today to discuss how you can optimize your training transfer than Matt? So without further ado, it's time to welcome him onto the show. So Matt, welcome to the Science for Sport podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. I've listened to the podcast quite a few times, various different guests. So, good to be here.
Oh, thank you very much. It's nice to have people who listen and contribute as well at the same time. So thank you very much for that. Can you give us a quick introduction as to who you are and what you've been up to until now?
Probably got the same old boring intro into, I guess, S&C as most people. I played rugby and probably went on a bit of a journey of trying to better myself for rugby and realised that I probably enjoyed coaching a little bit more than I actually did playing by the end. And from a bit of rugby internship, I then went to Speedworks to do an internship there, and that sort of, alongside doing my own stuff, PT-wise, that transition from a bit more, I guess, probably a starting block of most people, a bit of general pop, and transitioned into basically just doing stuff with athletes and mostly team sport, and then that's eventually just transitioned into me doing my own business and having my own business and doing some little bits with teams in the Rugby Premiership and the Super League for the Rugby League, and alongside that, just doing my own thing and just working with individuals. A nice little setup that we've got with the 3G pitch and a little bit of gym access as well. So yeah, that's where I'm at now, and stepped away from any team stuff as of this year, and then just completely sort of solely focusing on athletes that come to see me in like an individual basis.
Obviously fantastic. And your business is called Transferable Training, right? So that's what we're here today to discuss, the training transfer at least.
A bit of a play on words, but yeah, well, I'm not sure I'm maybe trying to be talking about it in too much detail, but I'll give it my best shot.
Excellent. And when we talk about transfer training, firstly, before we get into how that happens and how to do it and everything, what do we mean by the transfer of training?
I think for me, and again, that's probably for me, it's probably that the training that we're doing is contributing to match outcomes, and essentially, like, do you win, do you lose on a weekend? And that training, I would say, encompasses not just the S&C. I think transfer of training is generally thought of as an S&C thought process, but in reality, it's the physical, the technical, the tactical, the psychological, and all of those things intertwining in together. And yeah, ultimately those four things and how you focus on those four things and leads into that, what I would say is transfer of training, and that's match outcomes, or depending on what your environment is, maybe just individual KPIs that maybe do help with match outcomes.
And I'm rudely interrupting to make sure you're up to date and aware of the Science of Sport Coach Academy. The Coach Academy is an overgrowing library of sports science courses which are broken down into bite-sized chunks. So if you enjoyed today's podcast and you want to get your hands on some more great sports science information, all you have to do is hit the link in the show notes. You can get in there completely for free for the next 7 days. So hit that link when the podcast is finished. So why is training transfer then important, right? Because you mentioned winning and outcomes, like people want to win games, but why is it important that our training transfers to performance?
I think ultimately it keeps you in a job, doesn't it? Or certainly helps to support what you're actually doing, whether that be from a physical, technical, tactical, psychological, or an intertwining process of that. I think I'm a big fan of Mark Bennett, and he talks about essentially match outcomes and winning and losing. And he basically thinks that from a rugby point of view, and I apologise if there's any football coaches listening, and I'll try and give some other examples as well, but he sort of talks about kicking and ball carrying being an influence on match outcomes and winning and losing. And as probably S&C coaches, if we sort of narrow it down a little bit, we're probably not going to affect kicking that much, but we probably can have a nice effect on ball carrying. And I think if we strip it back to almost like a Bondarchuk classification and say that if ball carrying is at the top there and we want to have an influence on ball carrying and we want to prove that we're doing a good job, then we step down a level and say our sprinting or our resisted running or our counter movement jumps are changing and are changing as a result of the training that we're doing. And ultimately, that's hopefully, if you're very, very smart about it and you can pick out some bits and bats, you can probably start to say to coaches, here's where we think that we're starting to make a difference. But I think also then we can have a look at probably individuals and improve individuals. If we know that they're a physical specimen and they can hit high velocities at 10 meters, they're a great sidestep, they have a great sidestep. Us hammering them with more physical stuff maybe might not have that much influence on their ball carrying if we're saying that's what's going to affect match outcome. But being at the right place and the right time, the technical and tactical, and how we intertwine that with the coaches, that to me then shows how we become important. We're identifying that this person is awesome from a physical point of view. They need some more work on the rugby. Or we go the other way. This guy really understands the game. He knows where he needs to be, but we need to change some physical outputs about him so that he is more effective and can contribute to match outcomes.
Absolutely excellent. And when it comes to then the training, that right? Obviously, you mentioned like a really specific way of looking at it. So Bondarchuk classification of exercises, where exercises are very specific to throwing, for example. But what kind of age of athlete should be looking at that training transfer? Because I can imagine that at some point you go also from general to really specific, right? So what point should athletes be worrying about this?
I think worrying is definitely not the word that we need to worry about. Maybe up until, I guess ultimately we're probably, whether it's essentially we care about the weekend. At a young age, we probably shouldn't care about the result at the weekend. And then from an individual point of view, it's about when I guess people are approaching that point where decisions may be made about futures, whether they become a professional player or not. And I think, that's probably in around 18 plus, where things are starting to, like I say, make selections on players and whether they push on, or coaches are starting to care about what is the actual result on a weekend. And then from a physical point of view, then we're starting to say, like, if we're tracking things, at what point does linear speed or general strength or relative power, what point does that stop or reach the point where it's maybe not going to influence the game quite as much? And do we need to work more on understanding the game and how they get in there and how they get themselves involved in the game? But from a young point of view, I would still say the training we're doing should hopefully be transferring and actually making them better. It might be the most boring of training and the most general of training, but we still should be caring and hopefully seeing that it's making people better and having an influence on the game. We maybe, like you say, just don't worry about it quite as much, and we're maybe not honing in on things like stats from the game, from an individual point of view, from a team point of view, and how that then influences essentially, does someone progress? Does someone did the team win on a weekend?
And when it comes to actually training specific to the sport, and obviously you've mentioned the tactical, the technical, the psychological, but from a physical standpoint,
Yeah.
how should athletes then be training if they want to get that transfer? Because at some point, you mentioned it already, like there's a diminished return on investment, right? So what kind of training principles should be applied to ensure that athletes are getting some kind of transfer from their training?
I think it's ultimately stepping back a little bit and looking at the game KPIs and what do you want to achieve in the game. And then it's what's stopping, what's the lowest hanging fruit of them starting to make changes in those game KPIs. And limiting factors for that ultimately is going to be those high intensity actions, sprinting, accel and speed, change of direction, deceleration. And then I think you can sort of then really go into some finer points around how do those high intensity actions interact with actual game actions. How does someone take their linear acceleration from a standing start and apply that into accelerating into contact? Or how does a footballer accelerate, slam on the brakes, go 180 to create some space for themselves and get in and behind a defender? And that's when you can start to, I guess, start to get a little bit smarter about how you set up sessions and how you design your training and go forward from there.
And how does that then work? What would be getting a little bit smarter with a training session? How does that look like?
So I'm a Dododian. So I look at things through projection, switching, and reactivity. I think that a lot of people will probably be able to, or probably a lot of people know and understand now what projection, switching, and reactivity is, and maybe what that even looks like through a linear acceleration. But probably I think the next step to that, and maybe where I'm probably going with a little bit of stuff, is applying that to just movement as a whole. And can you project, switch, and be reactive out of a sidestep? Can you project, switch, be reactive out of a dummy when you throw a dummy and your upper body is rotated and disassociated from your lower body, and then you have to reaccelerate away from it? And can you take the real simple physicality of projection, switching, reactivity, and essentially then apply that into more game-like actions?
Absolutely excellent. And when we bring all of this together, I'm interested to hear what it looks like when you put this into a training session, right? So, can you walk us through what a session might look like with anyone who comes in?
Yeah.
Just an example of how you're going to walk through that process. And I'm interested to also hear things like any testing that you might do or any KPIs that you need to hit at given time points.
Yeah, so I'll try and go through this nice and slow. So I guess the starting point is probably now in my scenario is we're going to have a conversation with either the player, the parent maybe, or a coach potentially if they've pushed the player towards them, and we're probably wanting to know what part of those high intensity actions are they not seeing from that person, and how is that then how are we then going to go after that and apply that back into a little bit more specific scenario, a game like action? So once we've figured that out a little bit, we probably then want to know how are we going to measure that stuff. And that again depends a little bit on the scenario that person's in. If it's a high level academy player or even a first team player, a club has sent them out, we're probably looking at some kind of stats from their individual game, because they're going to have statisticians to be able to tell us this has improved. So we actually know the game actions are improving. If we step back from that, then and maybe we don't have that scenario. Maybe it's a young academy player that is just starting off. We probably go to the stuff that we classically think of, and it's again there's really simple actions of what's their velocity at 10 meters, what's their velocity at 40 meters, what can they get on a peak relative power on a counter movement jump, or what's the RSI on a drop jump, and how do they manage those things. And I think if you've got 3 or 4 of those things, and you can then feed that back to players, coaches, parents, then you've got your starting point a little bit, and you're then now starting to work back and go, well, how do I design the session to improve these things? So I set things up really, really simply, and again, I'll probably keep working backwards. So say if that speeds, we set it up into 3 things, or I set it up into 3 things of just speed skills, specific skills, and general skills. So that speed skill may be, if we use I'll use a football example because most of my stuff has been rugby, so I'll try and share it out a little bit. We had an academy boy come in who was a right back, and we sort of identified and chatting with parent a little bit as well was just general top speed and his ability to actually, and again, I'm not a football coach, so I'll try not to get too specific, but just essentially a supporting run right up the field, loop back round, and then can you send a crossing sort of thing. So that was essentially our end goal of the off season, was how do you put something into how do we make that look reasonably specific, and get to the point where making that look really, really cool and really tidy. So we ended up, our final session was essentially a 1-2 between us. So he would start and kick the ball to me. I would send a ball up to him quite, it was a good 30, 40 meter sprint. And I would kick the ball right in front, but there was actually some timing gates right through for him. Around that sort of, I can't remember where it was like a 20, maybe like a 20 to 30 meter fly. And he had to run through the gates, recollect the ball, and send a reasonably decent crossing to no one, but he had to put it in the right spot. Because we had, again, sort of stripped things back a little bit, we kind of knew what he was getting for a normal sprint without having to pass to me initially, without having to chase after a ball, without the reality of him having to then put a cross, maybe 10 meters further down the line. And we tasked him with, can you either equal your normal time or potentially even beat it? And also, can you hold together some good postures, some good patterns? He was very backside. So we had the camera out and we want to see, can you be fairly front side as you're chasing after the ball, or do you over rotate and start to go a bit more backside? And can you hold that together? So that was our end point. If we worked back from that, ultimately, we were then a bit more into, I would say his speed skills were probably for a few weeks, just essentially just running through the gate and can you hold those positions without any extra pressure apart from just the timing gates. And then if we strip that back then to his specific skills and how we set those up, that again, it was really simple. Can you run over hurdles or wickets and hold some good postures? Lots of fast SSC, plyometrics, and then of course, then loads of drilling, scissors, dribble bleeds, all again just to keep building postures, keep building reactivity, so that when he comes to being pressured, can he essentially hold it together? And then before that, we obviously then worked hard on just things like general skills. What ranges of movement are you limited in? What essentially is stopping you from being a normal functioning human being? Can you move in a multi-directional fashion and just have some kind of rhythm? Can you run backwards? Can you karaoke and look bouncy? And do you have good hip flexion and good hip extension? And that's really essentially how we break down the sessions. We're looking at what's the game action, and then what is the underpinning qualities of all of those game actions, and just working back from there, and just building and looking at where does projection, switching, reactivity break down, or where does one of those things that we've been practicing and we've got so good at in a linear, really basic, and I keep going back to the 10-meter acceleration, but it's just a really simple one. That does projection, have we been working on projection for a really long time, and we're holding together, but now we've stood 10 meters in front of where you're accelerating to, and you've got to now receive a pass and then throw a pass again to either the post and hit the post. And can you hold, when we go back on the video, do you actually project yourself off the line so that you actually hit the ball at pace and then still be able to throw the ball? So hopefully that was a very long-winded version of giving you a little bit of idea of what the sessions look like and how they build and how they change, I guess, throughout an athlete's time with us.
Yeah, absolutely excellent. I think it's really interesting to see how you break it down from the game components into how do we address those specific physical skills.
Yeah.
So if people want to find some more information about you and what you're up to, where's the best place to go and find you?
So main stuff is on Instagram. I go through stages of posting and then don't post for ages. I try my best with it, but sometimes I feel I have nothing to post about. Good training is usually boring training, so when it becomes boring training, I don't feel the need to post it as much. But yeah, transferable training on Instagram, and occasionally I'll post some stuff on Twitter or X as it's now called, but that's usually the same stuff that's on Instagram anyway. So yeah, Instagram is the place. Transferable training.
Absolutely excellent. So Matt, massive thanks for your time and effort today. It's been a pleasure talking, and I look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, buddy. And that's it. Once again, a massive thanks to Matt for all of his hard work on today's podcast. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure you did at home too. Before you leave, I want to point you in the direction of the Science of Sport Coach Academy. And the Coach Academy is an overgrowing library of sports science courses which are broken down into bite-sized chunks. So if you enjoyed today's podcast and you want to get your hands on some more great sports science information, all you have to do is hit the link in the show notes. You can get in there completely for free for the next 7 days. What's more, when you complete one of the courses, you get a certificate of completion which will prove your ongoing education. So hit that link in just a few moments' time. And if you have enjoyed today's podcast, it would be fantastic if you could recommend it to a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. That means that we can keep bringing the best possible guests and the best possible content. And that's it. Once again, a massive thanks from me. I'm Matt Solon of Science of Sport, and I'll speak to you next week.